Hey everybody, this should be a quick introduction on the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or as I'll probably call it, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. I don't have a lot to tell you about Robert Louis Stevenson because you will read about him in your textbook. Basically, he's born to a Scottish middle-class family who has a history of strong religious ties and marine engineering with lighthouses, and he kind of walks away from that. He ends up going to college and trying to study reading, but switches to law to make his father happy. And then he never practices law, even though he becomes a certified lawyer and begins to write. He does turn his back on his religious background and declares himself agnostic and socialist. And then he further scandalizes his family when he starts dating and eventually marries an American woman who's 10 years older than him. And when they first start seeing each other, she's still married, even though she's been estranged. However, he writes in a lot of different genres. You probably know one of his other really, really, really famous works, Treasure Island. But he hits his instant success with The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It does come after as Treasure Island, which was published in 1883, but Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is an instant hit in both Britain and America. There's a lot of psychological and ethical complexity to it, as the Norton book explains, that we kind of overlook in today's take of it. But this was a very psychologically disturbing read for a lot of his contemporaries who were having to confront some issues that they were facing in society. This book is great for us to start with because not only does it connect to the Gothic realm that we just left in the Romantic period, it's also connecting us to the shifting surfaces and anxieties under the surface in the Victorian period. It is technically from the late Victorian period, but I like starting with it because, again, it connects to the period before us, and it's also giving us that psychological turmoil that a lot of Victorians faced, even if they didn't want to admit it. Some critics do think this is a bit Scottish for a British work, according to Norton. And what I mean by that is, like, he puts it in London and claims this is taking place in London, but it really has more of a Scottish feel to it and Scottish characteristic. Because remember, even though Great Britain is one unified island at this point, it's under one government, you still have your three subsections. We could almost call them, I guess, like a state of Scotland, England, and Wales. And they do have their own very different cultures. You get their very religious tone that comes with Scotland, and it just fits really well. So there's a couple different notes that you guys don't have about this novel from Norton that I did want to share with you. One that I really like is that this is a really good book and speaks to anyone who's ever had a guilty pleasure or a secret that they've hidden from somebody, or they really want to give in to that bad side and like do what they know they're not supposed to do. This really speaks to them, which you can imagine would be upsetting to the Victorians. It would be upsetting to anyone who's not used to this discussion. Today in the postmodern world, we kind of can get numb to that idea because it's not a new idea. But when this was written, this was cutting edge and on that edge of the psychological piece that they aren't used to. This quote, "The London of Jekyll and Hyde is uncertain and unstable, a place where nothing is as it seems and where its inhabitants are hurled into a post-Darwinian nightmare of frightening proportions." Uncertain, unstable. Does that sound familiar from our Victorian introduction, maybe? The post-Darwinian really sticks out because there's a lot of focuses you can have with this novel, but one they make it really bring out is that in the novel there's going to be some friendships that fall apart because the scientific heresies that come out, and that was going on with the development of science, and Charles Darwin is publishing his studies on evolution, and so that's a huge issue, and we're going to get into that in this unit, but it is causing conflict. And then Hyde is described as being just barely a man, or not much more than animal, something like that. So going back to that idea of evolution and how humans came. So this book deals with psychology. It deals with evolving scientific ideas. And it just brings us back to this idea that in the book, there's no God, no true moral compass. There's nothing that can give guidance or certitude, which is how a lot of Victorians felt, especially by the late Victorian period. You will see a lot of duality of the self, and I think that's definitely an interesting discussion, and that might come back up later as a paper topic. But even if you've read this before, or you think you know the story just from all the pop culture references, give your full attention to that book. Let it really sink into you and dig into it. It's really good. It's a novella, so it's a shorter piece. It shouldn't take you long to read, and I'm excited to see what you think.